Well, welcome back to the Splitting Hairs podcast. I'm Kyle Sheehan. Today, I've got Dan Steenkamer of Hero Sports, who covers the CAA, the Colonial Athletics Association, and then the Delaware Blue Hens specifically. Dan, thanks for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's good to be back for a second straight postseason. This was fun last year around. Of course, I guess that was another battle of the blue opponent for SDSU. So they get both sides of that rivalry in the playoffs year to year.
Yes, sir. Indeed, it was good. For those of you who don't know, Dan was on the podcast back for the spring season in which we faced Delaware. That was a game I thought was going to be far more competitive. Obviously, we'll deep dive into that and some of the ins and outs and what made that game turn out the way it did. And then we'll forecast kind of what's to be expected, at least from the Blue Hens side of the ball on Saturday. But first, be remiss if I didn't shout out our sponsors, Cottonwood Coffee and Drake's Place. Can't thank you guys enough for continuing to ride with us here at the Splitting Hairs podcast, presented by Jackrabbit Illustrated. We love all the work you guys do. I don't know if any of you guys saw the Small Business Saturday stuff going on for Cottonwood. Tried to shout them out and drive that volume of business for them because they do so much for the local community. Same thing with Drake's Place out in Bodle, South Dakota. I'm sure Robert Drake is cooking up some nice themed eats and drinks and stuff like that for the Jackrabbit faithful as we gear up for the second season here in the playoffs. And for those of you who are looking for gifts for family, coffee is a safe bet. Coffee, wine, and liquor tends to be a big bet this time of year for my adult family members. And why not dabble in some Cottonwood? So, go to their website. You can get a 10% off on all orders of $10 or more by entering code JI22. That's JI22. And then obviously want to shout out Robert Drake again in Drake's Place in Bodle, South Dakota. So if you're coming from that direction for the playoff game, because we need to fill the Dana on Saturday for both squads and who've got really good classes here, really good senior classes, will be a last opportunity to see one of them. So you might as well get your rear end into the Dana Dyke House Stadium. So Dan, with all that being said, what's your take? What's your feel on how the game is going to play out this upcoming Saturday?
I would say it's a loaded question, but when I look at these teams on paper, I do think the strengths of each side favor South Dakota State pretty heavily. I think South Dakota State, I guess, you could view it as a stereotype, somebody who covers the East Coast a lot. I look at the Missouri Valley, but I'm not exaggerating when I say the offensive and defensive lines, the size of those sides of the line of scrimmage for the North Dakota State, the South Dakota State specifically this week, and the other, year to year really strong Valley teams. Those are lines that CAA schools, they face in their better CAA competition, but it's not the same level of size from the Midwest and the physicality that is displayed by those recruits. And so I think Delaware is going to, as much as it enjoys passing the ball, and Ryan Carty wants to throw the ball around the yard, I'm sure we'll touch on that in his philosophy. I think South Dakota State might be forcing Delaware into throwing situations even earlier than it would like. It might put Delaware out of schedule, behind schedule, trailing. Delaware is a team that can come back quickly because its offense is rejuvenated. It can move the ball down the field, but it struggles in short yardage and red zone situations. It's really been poor on fourth down, despite Coach Carty's aggressive tendencies. It hasn't been an efficient fourth down team. So all of these make it a situation in which Delaware has to keep it close for as long as possible. I really think there's almost an FBS game mentality for UD as it goes into this number one seed game.
Yeah, and we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on the FBS mentality that served them well as they went into the Naval Academy and got the dub over there. But now that's a completely different style of play, very different scheme. A lot of teams, flip a coin on how well they're going to be able to defend the triple option, the discipline, stay-at-home football. And I think that some teams just scheme those well, and it plays to their advantage. And as you know, Dan, this is all about matchups. Football is all a game of matchups. You may have a team that's far superior than another on paper, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day if there's certain elements of the roster that favor one side and tilt the competitive scales way far in another direction. And obviously our fan base and listener base for the South Dakota State Athletics and the Jacks are not a stranger to seeing really good offensive line play. Now, that being said, we had some yips throughout the course of this season. We've been able to find our stride. 3 weeks not playing any ball, though, that there is a question mark there. What will the rust look like? What will our timing look like? Will we be disjointed? We'll be able to find that rhythm in quick enough fashion to be able to keep the Blue Hens off schedule from a defensive perspective. Now, for the fans listening, just want to touch on this real quick and let you just riff on it. So Coach Carty is a former Blue Hen himself, and he just took over the reins this year as a first-year head coach with last Saturday's win. He is now is he the only coach in Blue Hen history to have an 8-win season in his first year?
In his first season. Yep, that's right. He's the winningest first-year head coach in Delaware history.
And an FBS win right off the rip. So this is a squad that can play and was maybe trying to figure some things out. I'd love for you to shed some light on their 4 losses this year and kind of what led to that and attributed to that. But for those who don't know, Coach Carty is coming from Sam Houston State, which we have intimate knowledge of, unfortunately, and wound up on the short end of the stick in the spring national title game. So he does know how to scheme the Jackrabbit defense. What are your thoughts on that? Is he an X factor coming into this game?
Well, Ryan Carty, I'd have to say he is an X factor coming into the game, and I guess any head coach can be a factor, right? But I think Carty is an X factor in more ways than one. I guess it's a semi on the field. His handling of officials has been aggressive, just like his play calling. He's, as a first-year head coach, you're always observing coaches in their first season, seeing how they'll approach game management with the officials. And in the case of Ryan Carty, he has been not shy about voicing his displeasure, maybe standing up for his guys, no matter how you want to spin that. He's gotten in officials' ears. It cost him 15 yards at Elon in a game that really got away from Delaware. So with the emotions being so high in another round of the playoffs, advancing to the second round in December, I mean, Delaware's last semifinal run was in the spring season. So, of course, that was early summer months playing semifinal ball or later postseason ball. And now Delaware's first December game since 2010 being played this Saturday. So emotions high for an alum like Coach Carty, but he'll have to keep things under control. As much as he wants his team to channel his own enthusiasm, he can't cost Delaware yards on Saturday if Delaware hopes to, like I said, hang around, make it a game into the fourth quarter or even into the second half, because really, I just think physically there's a chance to have this game wear down Delaware even in the third quarter. So Ryan Carty will have to be cautious in how he approaches his game management with the officials. But in terms of his approach, how he's gotten Delaware to this point, he is a well-regarded offensive mind. He has rejuvenated the Delaware offense that, I want to say, always had Nolan Henderson. Nolan Henderson's probably a name folks will remember out at South Dakota State. He's a veteran at quarterback for Delaware by now, 60-year player, 24 years old, a graduate student who's, I'm sure he's racking up the degrees by now, or he will this winter. He has even an extra year of eligibility after this one. I'm speculating. I say speculating because I haven't spoken with Nolan himself or people close to him too much yet, but I anticipate, my personal opinion is I don't necessarily expect him to use his remaining eligibility with one more year. So this could be his last ride as a Blue Hen. And for Nolan Henderson, Coach Carty has been extremely beneficial. And Carty and Henderson have talked about the synergy they have. A current quarterback being coached by a former quarterback. Ryan Carty calls the plays, and it seems like he and Nolan are really on the same page. Nolan's worked through injuries this season, and we've said that every season. And South Dakota State will recall Nolan was banged up and ultimately couldn't make it through that semifinal game. And not just because of the way the score was lopsided. I mean, it was a season in the spring even that Henderson had some dings and dangs pile up on him. But Ryan Carty is a pass-first offense. He's not apologetic about passing the ball first. He does have a stable of 4 running backs, so it's really by committee. It's a platoon running back approach for the Blue Hens, where no one running back really dominates in the carry share. Maybe there are 2 who are used more on first and second down, and then there's more of a short yardage back in Corey Spruill and another in Quincy Watson. But a big picture is a Delaware offense that likes to distribute the ball. Jordan Townsend's a key slot receiver. I mean, Delaware's talent at the skill positions fits what Ryan Carty wants to do, but its offense is completely handicapped by the fact that despite the over 400 yards a game UD averages, it really has a hard time between the opponent's 40-yard line and the opponent's 25-yard line. So even once Delaware gets in the red zone, that's its own category where the Hens have been inefficient. But really in opponent territory, as the field condenses, Delaware's preference for deeper routes, deeper passing routes, the field there isn't enough room for guys are going to hit their heads on the goalpost, to use that cliche. And I think from where I sit, Coach Carty could benefit from even taking what the defense gives him a bit, quicker passes that get the ball out of Nolan's hands, especially against a really strong defensive line. It's going to be able to get after a Delaware front that allows a little over 2 sacks a game. So I would expect South Dakota State to probably get double that number of sacks on Saturday. the only way Delaware can avoid that is if there are some more quick passes to Townsend in the slot. Brett Buckman out wide. Thyrick Pitts is another big receiver for Delaware. But I guess that's the best summary I could offer in one spiel is Delaware's offense. It will move the ball. It's moved the ball really all season long, regardless of the opponent. But where Delaware struggled is yards haven't always turned into points.
Yeah. No, it's understandable when you have that style of play, and as Cardi is still trying to get his guys in to that program, you're going to see growing pains, right? And so part of that comes with being a guy who is very creative and a former quarterback. So what do quarterbacks like to do? They don't love to hand the ball off as much as they like to throw the ball. So that would be a contributing factor to why they're putting up 270 plus yards per game through the air. Now, what happens is, coming from a guy who has roots at Purdue University, same struggles, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you get into the red zone, the field shrinks and you don't run the ball, well, and you're putting the ball up 40, 50 times a game through the air, that does not lend itself to quality play, at least in the red zone, unless you're getting big chunk plays and explosive play touchdowns, which hopefully don't happen for the Jacks on Saturday, but certainly the Blue Hens want to try to manufacture some of those of their own. Now, I think you make a great point. Great overview of the skill players and some of the talent. The Jacks fan base will certainly be aware of Nolan Henderson because not knowing a ton about him going into the spring matchup, he did have a lot of mobility. He was very slippery. For better or worse, he did get dinged up when his ankle, and you hate to see that because you want to beat everyone at their strength. He did come back into the game, if memory serves, and it just wasn't working out for the Blue Hens on that day. Now, that was under head coach Danny Rocco, different schemes, different approaches. Danny Rocco's son, if I'm not mistaken, was the OC for Western Illinois, though, under their previous head coach. And he had some things going against that Jackrabbit defense that I'm sure, albeit a completely different talent makeup on the Western Illinois Leatherneck team versus the Blue Hens and versus the Jacks. So although they move the ball, it's a completely different story. Now, but if you look at the way you're going to attack a team that has such a quality pass rush like South Dakota State, the more things change, the more they stay the same. They're just going to try to get the ball out quickly. It's no surprise to me. What I think Cardi will try to do is get the ball out quickly on the perimeter, stress the defensive backs to play up, to try to support in the quick pass game and or the outside run game. I think they're going to try to get the edge and try to use the space of the field against the Jacks, similar to the concept of the run and shoot, although it's not the run and shoot, which just leverages the space of the field against the defenders and tries to beat people to those spaces. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. Now, we got a wizard on our defensive side of the ball as well, who's had a heck of a year. Coach Rogers, the heir apparent that many of us will know in blue and yellow, our blue and yellow, not the highlighter color yellow, but just a subtle jab there, Dan. But Coach Rogers
is a bit of a highlighter yellow, isn't it?
Yeah. It's Coach Rogers is hitting his stride. So it'll be interesting to see. Talk a little bit about the Delaware defense. We know the Jacks have a great D. We know that Cardi's going to be coming at them, trying to attack in all different ways in a variety of looks. What about the Delaware defense? What do we need to be aware of?
You touched on Coach Rocco, and I think one of Ryan Cardi's best moves in succeeding Rocco was retaining Rocco's defensive coordinator, and that is Manny Rojas. And Coach Rojas, I think, and the impression I get from talking with players is, especially on the defensive side of the ball, Coach Rojas being held over with the coaching staff change is a big part of what kept Johnny Buchanan and Noah Plack key All-American level players, I would say, for Delaware's defense right here at home in Newark. Manny Rojas employs an odd front. It's an odd spacing up front, 3 men down on the defensive line, and it's as many as 5 defensive backs a majority of the time. Now, Delaware fans have been speculating maybe there needs to be a bit of an adjustment to that when you consider South Dakota State has a pretty strong running game led by Isaiah Davis, and Delaware might have to have a few more bodies in the box, but it's linebackers. Johnny Buchanan, I touched on, Drew Nichols, Liam Trainer. They're all excellent run fitters behind Archie's Hemingway, who lines up in the nose of that defensive line. So these are a number of all conference names I'm naming for Delaware, but they haven't, it all goes back to, they haven't gone up against a front like South Dakota State. And I'm sure it's just, you'd expect me to say something different, but I think that's the whole story here is Delaware fans Even if I would speculate within the Delaware program, there has to be some concern about how are we going to apply pressure to Mark Gronowski. And so as talented as Delaware's secondary is, and as strong as its cornerbacks, Justice Henley and Monte Struthers are another two all-conference level pair of players. As much as Delaware thinks it can maybe cover the Yankee brothers even, I think Isaiah Davis could be in position for a good day, because Delaware's strong suit hasn't necessarily been stopping the run. They've struggled to stop the run on a pair of drives against Morgan State, even at home this year. Elon's Jalen Hampton absolutely blew by Delaware for, I want to say, over 130 yards. And I was down there for that one, and it really stuck with me that Delaware's defense in the second half just, you want to talk about being worn down. I mean, I would throw on, I'm sure you watch a lot of video, Kyle. I don't have to tell you this, but the Elon at Delaware second half game tape, the way Jalen Hampton ran that ball, that's what South Dakota State, I think, is envisioning for the later stages of this game on Saturday. So Delaware's run defense is very gettable, and even its pass defense, big breakdowns late in games against Richmond and Villanova cost Delaware in those tight losses that ended the regular season and put into question whether Delaware would even make the field to begin with. So I think this Delaware defense, while it ranks really highly in total defense, top 5 in the FCS, top 5 passing defense in the FCS, all these are well-earned statistics for Delaware. When you look at the video from more recent weeks, taking out the St. Francis win, which no disrespect to St. Francis, but Delaware kind of jumped on him early in that one and maybe took SFU out of its game. I would say Delaware has put some things on tape that South Dakota State would like. But even having acknowledged that, Manny Rojas, Delaware has to be thrilled to have him still on board this season, the way he's coached his guys. I think he should be in the mix for coordinator of the year, quite honestly.
He should be in the mix for coordinator of the year. That's strong, because I think Coach Rogers would be that, having run the Dakota Gauntlet. I mean, certainly Coach Rojas has done some huge things as well.
I've said in the mix. Well, it'll be decided on Saturday.
There you go. It will be decided on Saturday. The best place to sort out these matters. And, the interesting thing about that St. Francis game, not to disparage them in any way, shape, or form, because, they had a heck of a season as well. But when you're looking at the way that game unfolded, very similar to the spring matchup against South Dakota State, where got a good 3-and-out early, did the Jackrabbits. And then from there, Delaware's doing some things out on the perimeter or trying to move the ball, and then the wheels kind of fell off in the red zone again. Actually, Caleb Sanders, big play, forcing a fumble. There was a recovery, and then the wheels just kind of came off. Razzle dazzle play with Mark Gronowski catching a touchdown pass. Isaiah Davis not even really getting off in that game. Now, granted, he was a freshman and still kind of emerging, trying to find his legs, so to speak. And now he's an absolute freight train. So, I mean, he's no secret to anyone. If you watch the national title game, if you watch what he did against Colorado State, if you watch what he did in the playoffs last year, I mean, I think he had like 700 some rush yards in the playoffs alone against CAA foe and host Villanova. So, he's no stranger to contact. He's no stranger to wearing down defenses. One thing we do need to keep an eye on, though, is there anyone, which is partially a rhetorical question, is there anyone who can match up with Tucker Kraft on that side of the ball?
Tucker Kraft, I look at Zach Hines too, but I know Kraft has been an even bigger name NFL wise, and he's certainly his health, his getting back to health is a big deal, I'm sure, for SDSU. I think of, when you think of a tight end, I guess you would think of in space, linebackers are over the middle of the field. Johnny Buchanan is Delaware's Buck Buchanan Award finalist. Johnny Buchanan hoping to make it the Johnny Buchanan Award, not the Buck Buchanan Award. I'd say Buchanan, although when you look a little more closely at the makeup of Delaware's roster at linebacker, Drew Nichols, I'd say, is a little more of that outside linebacker type. He's pretty rangy. He gets his hands on the ball. He's been known for his pass breakups and forced fumbles this season. I'd almost say Drew Nichols will draw a little bit of that assignment over the middle, but then I'm sure as South Dakota State is comfortable flexing Kraft however far across the field they like. And so that could even put Kedrick Whitehead and Noah Plack, the two safeties, maybe even more Plack, because he's that hybrid. Ryan Carty said he's more of that hybrid ranging into linebacker territory out of his safety spot. So I'd say the combination of Noah Plack and Drew Nichols will have to be tasked possibly with Kraft, which is no small feat, but that's no news to your listeners.
Certainly. And I mean, can't forget Zach Hines, his length alone and just his reliability through the run game, the pass game, but also finding him in key moments, whether it be UNI, the first game of the year in the spring season, whether it be the time that Kraft was out. The dude just plays ball and keeps chopping wood, carrying water. So we love to see that from our perspective. Now, Delaware is no slouch to having top NFL talent of their own, having a member of the secondary a few years back, if I'm not mistaken, being drafted as well, right? Nasir
Adderley, correct.
Nasir Adderley. Yeah. Yep. So, I mean, we should not take that secondary lightly. This is going to be an epic matchup. I really like, I mean, I was under the impression personally from all the tape I watched in the spring that Delaware was going to be the more physical team. And I don't know if South Dakota State even listens. I mean, I know some of the guys listen to this. I know the families and fan base listens to this. That's more of our draw, and FCS Fans Nation's fans across the U.S. kind of check in with this pod. But my impression was that Delaware was going to be the more physical team. I think SDSU maybe took that as a slight because they probably heard the echoes of that. And then we saw what happened in the run game. And now you mentioned the sacks and things like that. It'll be interesting to see what they're able to do to step up and raise their level of play. The Blue Hens offensive line. I do know that from a defensive perspective, I would imagine Rojas will hit us with some odd and even fronts. Or do you guys run a typical 4-3 like historically?
Yeah, it was a 3. If I said it correctly, it was a 3-5. Like I say 3-5, and then the linebacker count could be 3-3-5. I guess is what it amounts to. You see 5 DBs a ton of the time, and oftentimes it's 3 down linemen.
Yeah, that 3-3-5 and the 4-2-5 are becoming more and more broadly used throughout football in general. Just because as you see the passing games evolve more, you kind of need more of that defensive back body. And like, just for those listening, if this is kind of sailing over your head, nickel packages are 5 defensive backs or some type of linebacker DB body hybrid. Dime is 6, ironically. So these 4-2-5, 4 down defensive linemen, 2 at the next level linebackers, and 5 defensive backs lends itself to being able to nullify any type of passing attack, but also run more exotic blitz packages, which can help attack a heavy run offense as well. So it'll be interesting to see. And I think more so than their physicality, the amount of ball played by South Dakota State really lends itself to sound communication. I don't know if you caught this, Dan, but Garrett Greenfield and Mason McCormick are coming back to refine their game even more. So that's for another season. So, but we got unfinished business. Their level of communication due to all the ball played so far is only upping the play of the rest of the pieces on that unit. And, I think that could be something that with Nolan Henderson, we shouldn't scoff at that either. The amount of football he's played to be able to see situations, not be overwhelmed by the moment. It's going to be interesting. So what I know you're on a tight window here. What do you think are some of the key matchups to watch briefly? And what do you think the players of the game might be?
Yeah, I'm just running it down quickly. I should have mentioned probably earlier, and I'll squeeze it in here. Delaware's kicking game, a trio of young kickers. I expect 2 to travel, 2 kickers to travel for Delaware. Brandon Ratcliffe has the hot hand, or the hot leg, I should say. He converted a pair of kicks at Villanova from field goal range, and those are 2 of Delaware's 4 field goals made all season long. So I talk about the red zone struggles. Ryan Carty, a lot of times when he's hoping to drive his offense deeper into opponent territory, he's calling plays with the end zone in mind, and it turns into 4 down territory a lot in that no man's land that it becomes for Delaware, where past 30 yards, there isn't a lot of confidence in Delaware's kicking game just with the roster it has at kicker. Ryan Coe was on the squad. I believe he's on the squad for that spring semifinal. He transferred to Cincinnati, and so there's a bit of a vacuum at kicker for Delaware. So I'd say Delaware special teams, even on kickoffs, it's shorter kickoffs more times than not. Field position becomes a factor. So I'd say Delaware special teams versus South Dakota State in general is an area where you would probably give SDSU an edge. Offensive, defensive lines, I give the edge to South Dakota State in both categories. But if Delaware's offense, the play calling of Ryan Carty, that's the biggest singular coaching style approach difference as compared to that game in the spring semifinals. Ryan Carty, this is where he would make his money as the head coach at his alma mater, is if he can be creative enough to keep a South Dakota State defense guessing, which is not easy to do, because you said it best. They've seen so much football, and they saw a Ryan Carty offense in the form of Sam Houston. And so there's the print there, the blueprints there. So certainly Delaware, in more ways than one, has a huge task in the coldest game Delaware will have played for many of those guys in their careers.
Certainly. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on what Hunter Dustman's been able to do, because, and Stig has ultimate confidence in him. I mean, he'll roll him out there when it's, 50 plus pretty consistently. And now the leg strength is there. Now the accuracy and the fine tuning of the snap hold and the whole operation early in the year was something we needed to iron out. But now the Jacks were able to do that and really haven't had any miscues on that front, knock on wood.
Miscues. Getting our
For
friends
those
chiming in.
listening, I just riled up the pups. Sorry about that. But for those instances where we had some yips early in the year, we seem to have ironed those out with the whole operation. Mainly it was allowing leakage through. But in terms of whenever we get in range, I think the Jacks are going to be comfortable if they have to settle for 3 and not, be too over aggressive at home with the advantage. We should talk quickly about the weather. It's going to be frigid. We like to joke in Brookings about it being the tundra. It being a balmy 23 degrees or something like that out there. But, that'll be a wear on Delaware. I mean, just the fact that the Jacks had to travel, all over the U.S. last year was tough. But the confines are going to be familiar. So if nothing less, they'll have some familiarity, but playing that game in the spring versus playing that in December, those are worlds apart, literally.
Very, very true. I mean, in Delaware has also had a mild fall home schedule in terms of very fortunate with the weather, a lot of sunny days, 50s, 60s. So this is going to feel like a lot away under 20 degrees, I think, for you, Dave.
Definitely. And then going back to special teams, Hunter Dustman has been great in the kicking game and the punting game, kicking being kickoffs strategically. That could be a point of emphasis specifically from Delaware. Something that might tilt them more to wanting to go for it as well is kicking to Jaden Yankee is tough. He's all conference return specialist as well as an all conference receiver. So, those twins, it's a double-headed monster, literally.
Delaware's kick coverage hasn't been the greatest this season either. I mean, the hang time hasn't been excellent from the kickoff, the game, the place kicking game, and so you would cut your return coverage guys a bit of slack there. But Delaware's kick coverage has been leaky at times. It hasn't burned them in the form of a kickoff return for touchdown, but I have this weird vision. I have this feeling that is the kind of play that can happen in a playoff game that really turns everything on its head. I guess you don't need to look any further than Montana for that one, right?
Yeah, please don't remind me. I know you're talking about this recent Montana, but I still have flashbacks.
Yeah.
And the exact way that game was unfolding, Montana and SEMO, SEMO,
yep.
Was the way that it unfolded against us in 2009. Mark Mariani returned a touchdown, and
I got a text about that in a group chat. I'm in an FCS group chat. You'll never believe me, but there was a comparison made to that game too. So I'm sorry. I should have been conscious of that. How could I do this at the end of my segment? You'll never have me back.
What are you doing to me, Dan? I know, but at the same time, I appreciate the nod of Cardi being kind of an X factor because I'm not afraid of this Delaware team. Like someone asked me why the fear all of a sudden. I just don't know how it'll shake out because Cardi does scheme well and he knows how to scheme this Jackrabbit defense because save for, well, actually it is quite a different defense, but the makeup generally speaking is the same in terms of schemes and stuff. But I just can't wait. That's the biggest matchup to me is seeing Coach Rogers versus Cardi. I mean, these guys, they live, eat, sleep, and breathe football. So it'll be really fascinating. And all fans of football, not only just FCS, they're in for a treat, I think, as far as that's concerned.
They are, and it's because I think Coach Cardi, he's the head coach, but he really does, like you said, eat, sleep, breathe. He eats, sleeps, breathes offense, and you Coach Rogers at South Dakota State the same way with defense, and so it's a strength on strength in that regard. You said it best.
Yes, sir. Score predictions. What do you got? The spread is 14.5 for the Jacks right now in favor.
I'd see even more than 14.5 in some places. I know I don't want to spoil. You can check herosports.com. I got to plug real quickly. Sam Herder has his second round predictions out, and I guess I'll let fans go check the site to see his prediction. But for my prediction, I will take South Dakota State. I'll take South Dakota State by 17. I just think that's if Delaware keeps under 20. I mean, I probably sound like I'm sandbagging, from a local beat coverage perspective, but trust me when I say it isn't that. I just think that I've seen this before with Delaware in the sense that they have not performed well against South Dakota State or North Dakota State in recent years. We have a sample size against both schools by now. Ryan Cardi, it's his first time against either of the Dakota State schools as the head coach, but I think in Brookings, in these conditions, with Delaware's inability to convert in the red zone, I think that's such a huge part, or even in opponent territory in general. I've kept saying it. I'd like South Dakota State by 17. However that shakes out when it comes to the points. I just like them by that number. I guess that's a disappointing way. But however the math shakes out, that's the coverage I like.
Understood. I think I'm going to go 31-21. You never know if what the complexion will be. There's some lucky bounces here and there. If there's a lot of snow, I don't know if it's scheduled for the forecast, but we'll see how that plays out. And then, yeah, you don't know. We're potentially set to maybe get some guys back that we didn't. 3 weeks layoff. You never know, living up to a spread that's 17 points,
Right.
even being the number 1 seed.
Right.
I mean, the committee did think that the CAA was the strongest conference this year. Their words literally from the chair, I believe. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. Do you have a player of the game in mind on your side of the ball, or Jack's as well?
On Delaware's side of the ball on offense, Jordan Townsend, Thyrick Pitts was the biggest name at receiver entering the season, but Townsend, he's really emerged. I think Townsend's the player who's benefited most from the Ryan Carty offense. I mean, this offense, the slot receiver is such a huge part. I think the slot receiver probably runs the greatest variety of routes because I think the yards per attempt for Nolan Henderson, I don't have the numbers in front of me, which is unfortunate. I need to get sports information on this. Get me this yards per attempt because Nolan Henderson's yards per attempt has to be more than double his previous career high. I mean, this is a team that likes those deeper shots. I expect early in the game they'll take a 20, 25-yard shot down the field because it's what Ryan Carty wants to do. But Jordan Townsend, he does a little bit of that, but even more so, he's those short to intermediate routes that Nolan Henderson's so accurate on. So I like Townsend as the player of the game on offense for Delaware just to watch, and then on defense for Delaware, Johnny Buchanan, I'd be remiss not to shout him out. Really, a spirit, a heart of that defense. He tied a school record for tackles in a single game at Navy. So when Buchanan is on, that Delaware defense is on.
Beautiful. I'm going to go with Jaden Yankee on the offensive side of the ball. You never know if he's going to get off because of the run game or vice versa. The run game gets off because of him or his brother. The low-hanging fruit, I would say, is either Kraft or Isaiah. So that was my take. And I think on the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to go with Isaiah Stallbird. He's been a good stalwart there for the Jacks while we're trying to wait for, Bach to potentially return, which would be another X factor for the Jacks. But Dan, I know you got to run, man. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for shedding light on this year's iteration of the Blue Hens. You provided a ton of great knowledge and feedback for us on what to expect on Saturday. So appreciate you, man. And until next time, go big, go blue, go Jacks.